Beastie Boys as well. But anyway, we're continuing this look at how God is revealed through the motif of fire in our Holy Scriptures. And so lots of times when we're reading a passage, some sort of image of fire comes on the scene. And so we've looked at several different stories so far, starting with Moses and the burning bush, you're looking at what God has revealed in that, and so on and so forth, as we've looked at some Old Testament scriptures. Now we've come to a time in Israel's history where the people were in exile. And so the people of God have been exiled into captivity, and in some ways spread out, in other ways in Babylon together. And so we have this book called Daniel. Daniel is split into two halves, very, very, very clear-cut two halves. The first half, where this story falls that we just heard read for us, is a collection of short stories raising up great men of faith and what their faith says about how to behave even in dire straits such as captivity or exile. And so this is one of those stories. The second half of the book of Daniel gets really, really interesting or complicated, or however you want to look at it, as it really is an apocalyptic type book where we're looking at these cosmic battles mirroring what's going on earth with the ultimate message that even though things might look really terrible now here in your certain situation, God is ultimately going to win, and God is certainly in control. And so we have some of that in the second part of the book. But this is, maybe you remember from Sunday school or Bible school as a kid growing up, but certainly if you've ever heard it read, you can remember some of the imagery from this story and these three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and what this story means for the people in exile, and what it can mean for us today. And of course, our purpose for reading it today is we want to see what is being revealed about God through the fiery furnace. But basically, to set the stage, just quickly, and it's a real quick read if you want to read the first 6 or 7 chapters of Daniel for homework. And there's some great stories, but basically we've had, Daniel has been lifted up in the first couple chapters as someone that can interpret dreams, and he has, even in the midst of being in exile, he has been raised up as a leader in the foreign government, and Nebuchadnezzar has recognized his brilliance, and now we're going to have eventually the same thing happen with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as well. And so we have this king, Nebuchadnezzar, who is not a man of Yahweh, not a man of Israel's God, but a foreign king. And we have, in chapter 3, what he has done is he's erected this golden statue. And it's huge. And what he has some instructions for the people, including the people of Israel, that are in his land now as captives. He has some instruction. He says, all right, basically when these instruments play, the flute, the lyre, etc., when you hear the blaring of the trumpets, then everybody has to, wherever they are, hit the floor, bow down, and worship this golden statue. And so if you're a person of Israel, if you're a person that follows Yahweh, that's not cool, right? Amen. Everybody looks like you're really interested in this. Or are you just tired? It kind of scared me the way you kind of really intently, like I got to back up and stuff. Make sure I'm on my feet. But that'd be great if you are. So just pretend like you're really into it. You're not tired. But anyway, so this basically bowing down to this image that has been made, this so it's all kinds of things going on that are against the way of faith for the people of Israel. But nevertheless, and put yourselves in their shoes. If you're just thinking honestly about it, here you are. Your way of life has been destroyed. Your houses have either been left behind or destroyed. The temple's been destroyed. Everything you know about family and those kinds of connections and where you grew up, gone. You've been carried off to a foreign land. If you didn't stay behind and try to live life that way, you've been carried off. And so not only everyday life, but the center of your life, which is your faith, gone, and you have nothing to take with you in terms of that. And on top of it all, you're not sure. You feel very distant from God. And so all of this is going on. And so you end up in this foreign land. Just think about probably, I know that for me, like if I had my kids and all 5 of them, and we made it, and my wife, and I'd just be worried about survival from one day to the next. Like, how can I, my way of life is finished. And so right now, I just need to figure out, how are we going to make it to Monday? And so if you're really honest with yourself, you might be in the same place. Maybe you're, a super Christian, super faith person, and you can't even think that way. But if you're like me, you're probably thinking, let's just survive till tomorrow. And so when the foreign king, who is in charge of whether you get food or not for your kids, says, now when you hear these instruments play, the horn, the pipe, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the flute, and every kind of instrument, then you must bow down and worship the gold statue that the king has set up. You may very well not just be tempted to do it. You might just say, all right, this is our way of life now, and if we're going to survive, we have to do this. And so it's remarkable that we have a story here in the midst of this where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are 3 leaders of the people, and they've actually made their way up, and they're actually working for the foreign government. They're doing very well. And so they know where their next meal is coming. And in the midst of, their former life has been shattered, but they're starting to rebuild their life, and they're quite frankly doing very well compared to some of their family and friends, if you can imagine that. And now all of a sudden, they hear this command, but for some reason now, they are able to say, you know what? Life is pretty good here. We didn't think it was going to be this way. But as long as we continue to do what we're doing, things are going well. But no, they're able to say, you know what? Can't do it. Cannot bow down to this image, this golden image. When those flutes, lyres, zithers, pipes, and horns blow, we can't do it. We can't do it. Cannot do it. And they knew, because the king had said it, and the king's men had reported it, and declared it, punishment for not bowing down was to be burned alive in the fiery furnace. Sounds like a good way to spend a Monday afternoon, right? All right, so they knew the consequence. They knew the consequence. And so we go on, we hear this awesome story about the king calling them, and it's a great conversation back and forth between King Nebuchadnezzar, and once he sends for Shadrach and his buddies, he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I've set up? If you are now ready to do so, bow down and worship the gold statue I've made when you hear the sound of all those instruments. But if you won't worship it, you'll be thrown straight into the furnace of the flaming fire. Then what God, he kind of mocks them now, then what God will rescue you from my power? Well, the boys answer the king, and they say, we don't need to answer your question. If our God, the one we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of flaming fire and from your power, your majesty, then let him rescue us. Did you catch that verse? That wasn't read for us up here. This is a critical verse. Listen to what they say. They say, if our God, the one we serve. That's not how we think today. If our God, the one we serve, is able to rescue us. If our God, what's the key word there? If our God, the one we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of flaming fire and from your power, your majesty, then let him rescue us. And then here's the verse to take with you. If you don't remember anything else that I say today, but you look like you're really paying attention, which is good still. But if he doesn't, know this for certain. Now this is awesome. If he doesn't know this for certain, your majesty, we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Never. Even if he doesn't. Even if he can't. We will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. And so then what goes on is a wonderful little story about inside the furnace. And this furnace, Nebuchadnezzar was so mad about that. He was so mad because at that point he had lost his power. The king had already lost here. Regardless of what's going to come next, he's already lost. He's already lost. Getting fired up, spitting and things flying off. Already lost. And so then it goes on. He was so mad he had the flame fired up 7 times more than what they usually are. So hot. I caught this time reading this week that I had missed all before. So hot that the men that were throwing the 3 boys into the fire, just by getting close to the furnace, what happened to them? They burned. They burned. I mean, that's incredible heat. Awesome. It's awesome. Not for them, but awesome story. So then, the king jumps up. He freaks out. As our kids would say, he freaks out. Mommy, Daddy, Marley's freaking out. They say that all the time. Anyway, so the king freaks out. He jumps up. And he said to his associates, didn't we throw 3 men down into the fire? He replied, look, I see 4. I see 4 men. Anybody ever been to, this has nothing to do with the sermon. Anybody ever been to Disney World? And I know Harry, y'all just at Disney World. Did you do the Pirates of the Caribbean? Oh, great. Ruined the story. So anyway, in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride or feature or whatever they call them at Disney World, what's Johnny Depp's character?
Jack Sparrow.
Jack. Captain Sparrow. Captain Jack? Jack Sparrow. All right. Anyway, there's 3 along the ride. There's 3 Jacks, Captain Jacks, along the ride, But every once in a while, people that are on the ride will notice a 4th. Notice a 4th. So if you're ever there and you missed it, Harry, you could have seen it.
Sorry, you're down Frozen.
Oh, okay. All right. It's always about the kids. 4th. If you see a 4th Captain Jack, it's because Johnny Depp has actually stepped into and actually playing himself, or playing Captain Jack. So sometimes people will count, oh man, we've already seen, there's a 4th. So one of those 4 was actually Johnny Depp. That legend has it. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the sermon other than the king. I mean, that'd be really cool. But the king doesn't think it's cool that he sees 4 people in the furnace. He freaks out, jumps up, and says, hey, what's going on here? And he gathers some of his leaders. Hey, didn't we throw 3 people in there? Why do I see 4? Why do I see 4? And so the king, and this is the turning point of the story, the king looks around and says, I see them walking. Not only do I see 4, but they're walking around the fire, and they're not hurt. They're not burnt. And the 4th looks like one of the gods or an angel or whatever. And so Nebuchadnezzar went closer to get a closer look. And he sees what's up, and he says, and he tells them, come out, come out, come out. So then they come out. Now here's where we're tempted. For our purposes, thinking about revealed and what's being revealed, we're very tempted now as readers of this passage to just read that and make a determination and say, all right, what's being revealed to us then is that God is always with us in fire. God's always because look, there's a 4th that must be God, or at least God's workers. And so the big reveal here, the big reveal in this story this week is that God's with us in the fire. Wrong. Wrong. I mean, God is always with us, certainly in the fire and in the beautiful times too. But there's a whole lot more going on in this passage than that. It's tempting to read it that way. But we need to be clear that that's not a shallow reading, but we're not going deep enough if we just stop there. And we're going to miss something very profound. And so we need to continue on thinking about what's being revealed. And what we can think about now is that as the 3 men come out, we can start thinking about how is it that these three men, we ask that question, start answering, how is it that these three men could risk being thrown into the fire, and from their own words, they don't know whether they know God's going to be with them, because God's going to be with them, but they don't know whether God's going to save them from the flames or not. They say that with their own words. They say, I don't know if our God's going to save us, or even if He can, but we're willing to do it anyway. So what was it about this? Well, these three men, here's what it was. These three men, before they woke up this Sunday morning, I'm just making that up, this Sunday, they had already decided who they were. They already knew their identity, who they were. They already knew their principles. They already knew that belief in the first two commandments, remember these are people of the law, people of the commandments, they knew that there was no other God other than Yahweh, and they knew that they would never bow down. Second commandment, don't make no image, or make no other image, or statues, or whatever. So they already knew that. They were committed to that. They were committed to their beliefs in those two commandments. There is no God but our God, and we're not going to make any image. They had already committed to that. They already knew what they stood for. And so when the testing came, they were already prepared. They didn't have to think about it. They didn't have to decide, all right, what should we do? Should we live to see another day and bow down, or should we refuse? No, they knew, regardless of the outcome, what was the right thing to do for them. They didn't have to think about it. They were certain in their belief of the two commandments. They were loyal to it, even if it meant death for them. And it also made me think when I was reading this, what about all the martyrs that we have in history, like Joan of Arc? How'd she die? Fire. So was God not with her in the fire? Wouldn't she be PO'd if she read this story again and said, after she died, and said, hey, wait a minute, I had faith just like Shadrach, but I died, they didn't. What's up? Is God sexist? But no, for Joan of Arc, for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's not about the punishment. It's not about the punishment. For a martyr, it's about the cause. And it's about their faith in God. It's not about whether they survive or not. And that's so foreign to us as Christians today. Because we get all caught up in following God so we don't go to hell. Or believing in Christ so we go to heaven when we die. I mean, that's cool. That's great. It's a lot cooler if you go to heaven than hell. Thanks for chuckling. That's good. But if that's the sole purpose for following God, then we're using God. We're just taking from God. And that's not what this is all about. Take. I hear that around the house all the time. Pastor Melissa, all y'all do is take from me. She's talking to me, not the kids. But that's a sin. That's a human. That's being very human to take, and never want to give. And we do that to God, and then we say, all right, God, I'm going to take this salvation from you, and that's the only thing I care about. Forget everything else that's going on here. If I say I believe in you, I know I can get my ticket to heaven. That's sinful, I think. It's sinful. If I just say the sinner's prayer, then everything's cool. Suppose we didn't know that for sure. Would you still follow God? Would you still love God for God's sake? If you didn't know for sure that you were going to go to heaven just for saying you believe in Christ. If you weren't scared of going to hell, would you still follow God? I mean, that's the real question. And that's what these martyrs, they don't care about the consequence. They don't care if they step into this fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whether God's going to save them or not. They don't care about that. It's moot in terms of the point. What they care about is that they know they love God with all their heart, mind, and soul, that they can't bow down to any other God. They certainly can't make a God out of any other image. They know who their God is, and so it doesn't matter. They're not going to do it. They've already decided they're not going to do it. And so they step into the fire regardless of what the consequence is. And in that case, the martyrs, and in this case, they weren't martyred, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they've already won. Whether they died in that fire or not, the oppressor, King Nebuchadnezzar in this case, is already lost. They've lost their power. Because what he wanted more than anything was for those three to bow down and to ignore their God. The king lost. Even if they had died in the fire, they lost. So what's being revealed here, because remember King Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 15, what God will rescue from our power? Well, he already lost his power even if they would have died. And the reason he lost their power is because of their unswerving faith in God. And so what's being revealed here in this scripture is God's way will be vindicated. God's way was vindicated in this story. God's way was vindicated in Joan of Arc's story because she was willing, regardless of the consequence, to not relinquish her faith just to live another day. God is vindicated, is what's revealed. The story encourages us. This story encourages us, our response to that. We're encouraged to be about our task of faithfulness and our great refusals. And so what we want to think about in this story, God's vindicated through this. And so what we think about today, what we want to pull from this is what are our tasks of faithfulness, especially what are our great refusals? What are we willing to refuse today, tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? What are we willing to refuse at all costs? At all costs. Whether God delivers us from the worldly consequence or not. What are we willing to refuse? What are you willing to refuse at work, Stephen? In the name of your faith, regardless of what happens to your higher-ups. You're pretty high up, though. So you don't have too many higher-ups to worry about. But what are you willing to refuse? What are you willing to refuse on campus today? In the name of your faith, regardless of what the girls are going to think of you. That's a pretty higher up, the girls on campus. What are you willing to refuse at all costs? And the point is, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had already determined that. They didn't have to go case by case and think, all right, here's what's presented itself in this terrible circumstance. Now let me weigh the consequences. No, they'd already determined. They'd already determined that there was no other God but their God, and they weren't going to have any other images of another God that they bowed down to. And so their great refusal, they were willing to take on, even if it meant death in the fiery furnace. And so you have to know where you stand on God's side so that there's no question how it is we're going to respond in these great and terrible circumstances in terms of testing. It's a difficult story, if we're honest with ourselves. It's a wonderful story, and it's a miracle story where God saves them in the fiery furnace. The story reveals lots. But today I want to think about it revealing that God is vindicated, not based on avoidance of a consequence. That's just a happy ending to the story, that they didn't die. But God's vindicated when we're willing to refuse, to bow down to whatever it is the world has put before us. And from 10 o'clock on today, we're going to have countless opportunities to bow down to images and to the gods that we've created and that the world's created for us. And we have to be steadfast in what we're going to refuse to do. And it starts before we ever take one step out into the world. It starts in here, in our hearts, right now, right today, in terms of what we're going to be committed to in terms of our faith, regardless of whether we are saved from the consequence or not. We are so sure of our God being vindicated through our faith that we don't care about the natural or worldly consequence. So I'll leave that story for you and to you.